Freeloaders don't eat here. That's what my mother said right before she dumped my untouched plate into the trash. The room went quiet, not shocked, just watching. 50 people, and not one of them said a word. My father didn't even look at me. He just slid a notarized contract across the table. $79,000, already printed under my name. They thought this was pressure. They thought I would fold. Like I always had. But they didn't know something. This didn't start tonight. If you want to understand why I didn't reach for that pen, you have to go back. My father slid a notarized contract across the Thanksgiving table like he was passing salt. The paper stopped right in front of me, perfectly aligned with my plate. And that's when I knew this dinner was never about food. We had nearly 50 people packed into the house. Aunts, uncles, cousins, church friends. People who smiled too easily and watched too closely. The kind of crowd that doesn't intervene. They observe. My mother stood at the head of the table, not serving anything, just waiting. My sister sat 2 seats away, wearing a white satin bow and a rhinestone tiara like this was already her moment. She didn't look nervous, she looked expectant. My father tapped the contract once, not hard, just enough to make sure everyone was listening. Then he said it, calm and measured, like he'd rehearsed it. Pay the $79,000 for your sister's wedding, or leave this house and don't come back. There was a pause after that. Not confusion, not shock. Just silence, like everyone was waiting to see how I would react. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She didn't look at me. She looked at the room. "Everyone here agrees," she said. "You owe her this." And that's when I realized this wasn't a conversation. This was a performance. My sister leaned back in her chair, smiling like she'd already won. "I already booked the venue under your card," she said casually. "So really, you're just making this harder than it needs to be." A few people chuckled. Not loud, just enough to show they were comfortable. Comfortable watching me get cornered. I looked down at the contract. Clean lines. Official stamp. My name already printed where the signature should go. They hadn't come here to ask me. They came here to watch me comply. When I didn't reach for the pen, my mother moved first. She picked up my plate, full dinner untouched, and dumped it straight into the trash beside the counter. No hesitation. No warning. "Freeloaders don't eat here," she said, loud enough for everyone. A few heads turned. Some people looked uncomfortable. Most didn't. Most just kept watching. My father stood up then, walked behind me, and reached for my car keys sitting on the counter. He didn't ask. He just picked them up and slid them into his pocket. "The car stays," he said, "until you decide to do the right thing." That word, right, hung in the air like it meant something. Like this was about morals, like I had done something wrong. I scanned the table slowly. Faces I had known for decades. People who had eaten at that table, celebrated holidays, watched me grow up. Not one of them said a word. No one told my parents to stop. No one asked a question. No one even looked at me like I had a choice. That was the moment something shifted for me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, steady realization settling in. This wasn't pressure. This was control. I stood up slowly, not rushing, not reacting the way they expected. I buttoned my coat, adjusted my sleeve, like I was getting ready to leave a meeting that had gone on too long. My mother's voice sharpened. "Sit down. We're not finished." I didn't look at her. I looked at my father. "Give me my keys." He shook his head once, calm, certain. "Not until this is resolved." I nodded slightly like I understood, because I did. I understood exactly what they were trying to do. So I reached for my bag, picked it up, and stepped back from the table. My sister laughed under her breath. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic," she said. It's just money. Just money. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly honest. I looked at her, then at the contract, then back at my father, and for a second, the whole room felt very still, like something was about to break. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain anything. I just said one sentence. You might want to call the venue before you call me ungrateful. And that was the first moment they realized this wasn't going to go the way they planned. 2 years before that dinner, I got a call from my bank while I was at work. I remember stepping out of a meeting, thinking it was routine, something minor I could handle in 5 minutes. It wasn't. The representative sounded careful, almost rehearsed. She said there had been an attempt to add an authorized user to one of my personal credit cards. The request didn't go through, but it triggered a review. They froze the account immediately. I asked her where the request came from. She couldn't give me a name, but she gave me enough. It originated from within my family circle. I stood there in the hallway, phone pressed to my ear, replaying that sentence over and over. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't accuse. I just went home, opened my laptop, and started checking everything. Transactions, access logs, old statements, patterns. Nothing obvious jumped out, but that was the problem. Whoever did it knew enough to stay just inside the lines. Careful, quiet, familiar. That's when something shifted for me. I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like someone responsible for risk. From that point on, I changed how I handled everything. I separated accounts, added alerts, tightened permissions. I stopped sharing information, even casually. Not in a dramatic way. Just small adjustments no one noticed. And over time, I started seeing things I hadn't seen before. Comments about my salary that were a little too specific. Questions about my accounts that felt a little too casual. Assumptions about what I could cover that didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't one moment. It was a pattern. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. In my family, responsibility wasn't respected. It was expected. And once you proved you could carry something, they didn't ask if you wanted to. They just placed more on your back. So by the time my sister said she booked a venue under my card, I didn't feel shocked. I felt something else. Recognition. Because I had already seen the early version of this. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. So when my sister said she booked the venue under my card, I didn't react the way they expected. I didn't reach for the contract. I didn't argue. I didn't even look surprised. I just looked at her, then at my father, then back at the paper sitting in front of me. Clean, official, already decided. That's when I noticed something else. No one was actually asking me a question. There was no, "Can you help?" No, "Would you consider?" It was already framed like a done deal, like my answer didn't matter. I could feel the room watching, waiting for me to fold, waiting for the version of me they were used to, the one who kept things smooth, the one who handled it quietly. I almost laughed, not out loud, just enough to feel it, because they still thought this was about pressure. They thought if they made it uncomfortable enough, public enough, I would give in just to end it. But I wasn't uncomfortable. I was clear. So I stayed exactly where I was, hands off the table, no sudden moves, no emotional reaction for them to grab onto. My mother crossed her arms, impatient now. My father shifted his weight, like he was getting ready to push harder. And I let the silence sit there longer than they liked. Because silence, in a room like that, starts to say things people don't want to hear. That was the moment the dynamic started to shift. And they just hadn't realized it yet. I reached into my bag slowly, not dramatic, not rushed, just deliberate enough to make people pay attention. A few heads tilted. My sister's smile tightened, just slightly. My father didn't move, but I could feel him watching my hands. I pulled out my phone and unlocked it, scrolling for a second like I was checking something minor. Then I looked up, not at the whole table, just at my mother. "Do you want to tell them?" I said, calm and even. Why my card was flagged 2 years ago? The reaction was instant, too fast. "This is not the time for your paranoia," she snapped before anyone else could speak. That answer did more damage than anything I could have said. Because people don't jump that quickly unless they already know the question matters. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push. I just tapped my screen and turned the phone slightly so the people closest could see the email thread. "The venue deposit didn't clear," I said. "Not because I refused tonight, because the card you used has been locked for a long time." Now the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but you could feel it. Conversations that had been one-sided started to loosen. People leaned back instead of forward. My sister straightened in her chair. "You're trying to ruin my wedding over a technical issue," she said, sharper now. I shook my head once. "No, I'm pointing out a financial issue you hoped I would fix under pressure." There it was. Not loud, not explosive, just clear. And clarity makes people uncomfortable when they've been relying on confusion. One of my aunts stopped eating. Someone at the far end of the table put their fork down. For the first time that night, I wasn't the only one paying attention to what was actually being said. I kept my tone steady. "So there are only two options here. Either you didn't book the venue under my card, and you're lying to everyone at this table. Or you did, knowing the account was frozen, and expected me to fix it publicly." That's when the silence changed. Before, it was passive, observational. Now it was active. People were thinking. My sister opened her mouth, then closed it. That confident energy she walked in with didn't disappear, but it cracked. "You work in compliance," she said, trying to recover. "You know how these things go. You're blowing this out of proportion." I almost smiled at that, because she said it like it helped her case. "It's not out of proportion," I said. "It's exactly in proportion." And that's when someone outside my family finally spoke. "Wait," the groom's mother said from across the table. "Why would Emily be paying for this at all?" The question landed heavier than anything I had said, because it wasn't emotional, it wasn't personal, it was logical. And logic doesn't bend as easily. My mother stepped in quickly. "It's a family arrangement," she said, too smooth, too practiced. I looked at her, then back at the table. "No," I said. "It's pressure dressed up as generosity." A few people shifted in their seats. A few looked down. And a few, the ones who had been enjoying the show earlier, suddenly looked like they weren't sure what role they were playing anymore. My father took a step toward me, lowering his voice like he could still contain this. "Sit down," he said. I met his eyes. "Give me my keys." "Not until you stop this." I nodded once, slow and steady. "Then keep them." Because in that moment, I understood something clearly. If I stayed, I would be fixing this again. And I was done fixing things that were never mine to begin with. So I didn't argue anymore. I didn't try to explain, didn't try to convince anyone at that table. I just reached for my coat and slipped it on like I had somewhere better to be. My mother's voice followed me immediately. "You're not walking out like this," she said, sharp now. "No performance left." I paused, just long enough to acknowledge it, but I didn't turn around. My sister laughed again, but it didn't land the same. "You're really going to blow this up over nothing?" she said. I adjusted my sleeve, picked up my bag, and stepped away from the chair. "Over nothing?" I repeated, more to myself than to her. Because that's what they needed it to be. Small, manageable, something I could be guilted into fixing, but it wasn't small. It was years. I could feel the room shifting behind me. People weren't as comfortable anymore. The silence had changed again, heavier this time, less certain. My father's voice came lower, controlled. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. That line was supposed to stop me. It probably would have. Once. I stopped at the edge of the room, hand near the door, and let that sink in for a second. Not the threat. The meaning. Because what he was really saying was simple. Stay. And keep carrying us. And that's when it clicked. I wasn't losing anything by leaving. I was dropping something that had been placed on me a long time ago. So I opened the door. Cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. And for the first time that night, everything felt quiet. Behind me, voices started rising. Confusion, anger, panic trying to form. I didn't turn back, because I already knew what would happen next. They were going to realize they couldn't make this go away without me. I checked into a hotel about 20 minutes away. Nothing fancy, just quiet, neutral, far enough that no one would accidentally show up. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on, staring at my phone while it lit up over and over again. First, it was calls. My mother, my father, my sister. Then numbers I hadn't seen in years. Relatives who suddenly felt involved. I didn't answer. Not one. I let every call go to voicemail. Then I listened. Not right away, not emotionally. I listened like I would review a report. Detached. Paying attention to what was actually being said. My mother's messages came first. She said I had embarrassed the family, that I had humiliated people on a holiday, that I was acting unstable. She never mentioned the contract. Never mentioned the pressure, just the optics. My father's tone was different. Controlled at first, then slipping. You need to come back and fix this, he said, before this becomes permanent. That word again. Fix. Like that had always been my role. My sister's message sounded like she was crying. If you didn't know her, it would have worked. I can't believe you'd do this to me, she said. You know how much pressure I'm under. I paused that one halfway through. Not because it hurt, because it was familiar. They weren't apologizing. They weren't questioning what happened. They were reacting to the inconvenience of me not cooperating. That was the pattern. By morning, my phone looked like evidence. Missed calls, voice notes, texts stacking on top of each other. I screenshotted everything, forwarded copies to a secure folder, and started making changes. I ordered replacement keys. I froze every account connected to my name. I updated permissions, removed access points, flagged my credit for monitoring. Not dramatic moves, just necessary ones. The kind you make when you stop assuming people will respect your boundaries. Around noon, I emailed my manager. Short, direct. I told him there might be contact from family involving false financial claims. He called me within 10 minutes and said, "Whatever this is, we've got you." That sentence landed harder than anything else that day. Because it was the first time someone had responded without expecting something from me. But my family wasn't done. The messages shifted. Less emotional, more strategic. My cousin sent screenshots from the family group chat. My parents had posted a long statement explaining that I was going through something personal, that I had misunderstood a loving request. My sister added a broken heart emoji. "I still love her," she wrote. I stared at that longer than I expected. Because it wasn't just manipulation, it was coordinated. They weren't trying to talk to me anymore. They were building a version of the story where I was the problem, and they were patient, supportive, misunderstood. And if I stayed silent, that version would stick. That was the moment something else clicked. Silence doesn't protect you in a system built on distortion. It protects them. So I opened my laptop, created a new document, and started writing. Not feelings, not opinions, a timeline, dates, incidents, financial details, screenshots, messages, anything that showed what actually happened without exaggeration. The more I built it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about one dinner. It wasn't about one request. It was a system. And I had been the one holding it together. I leaned back in my chair, looked at everything laid out in front of me, and realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. They weren't going to stop. Not unless something forced them to. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix it. I was thinking about who needed to see it next. I sat at that small hotel desk and kept building the timeline, line by line, date by date, no emotion, just facts. It felt almost mechanical at first, like I was doing my job. But then patterns started showing up. Not obvious ones, not the kind you see in a single moment, the kind you only notice when you stop isolating each incident and start stacking them together. I scrolled back through old messages, bank alerts, casual conversations I had brushed off at the time, comments that sounded harmless on their own, questions that felt normal back then, but together, they told a different story. Every time my sister wanted something expensive, the tone changed. My parents framed it as a family need, not a request, not a favor, a responsibility. And every time I hesitated even slightly, the pressure increased. Not immediately, not directly, it built. First came the jokes. You're the successful one. Then the reminders. We've always supported you. Then the guilt. Family shows up for each other. By the time it reached a breaking point, compliance felt easier than resistance. That was the system. I stared at the screen for a long time after that, because once you see a pattern like that, you can't unsee it. It doesn't matter how much you want to explain it away. It's there. And the strange part was, I stopped feeling confused. For years, I had second-guessed myself, wondered if I was overreacting, misreading, being too rigid. I had taken each situation separately, giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. But when you line everything up, the doubt disappears. What replaces it isn't anger, it's clarity. I realized something in that moment that I probably should have understood a long time ago. In my family, reliability wasn't appreciated. It was converted. Converted into access, into expectation, into something they could draw from without asking. And I had let it happen, not because I was weak, but because I was consistent. I showed up. I solved problems. I made things work. So they built around that. They built a version of reality where I was the safety net, the backup plan, the quiet solution to every expensive problem that showed up. And the more I gave, the less it felt like giving. It started feeling like maintenance. That was the part that hit the hardest. Not the money, not the dinner, not even the humiliation. It was realizing that my role in that family had never been equal. It had been functional. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the document again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was just accurate. And accuracy is hard to argue with. That's when the last piece clicked into place. This wasn't something I could fix by setting a boundary quietly. It wasn't something that would change if I just said no more clearly, because this system didn't rely on misunderstanding. It relied on me continuing to cooperate. And the moment I stopped, everything connected to it would start to shift. I closed my laptop slowly, sat there for a second and let that settle in. Not what they had done, but what it meant for what came next. I didn't fully understand until the next message came in. It was a number I didn't recognize. No name, no context, just a short text that said, "Hi, this is Michael. We need to talk about your sister's wedding before more money gets involved." I read that twice. Before more money gets involved. That part stuck. I called him back a few minutes later, not rushing, just curious enough to see where it led. His voice sounded tired, like someone who had already been dealing with something longer than he should have. He didn't waste time. "I think your parents have been using your name," he said. "With David's family." I didn't interrupt. I just let him explain. Apparently, over the past few months, my mother had been telling the groom's family that I was handling a large portion of the wedding expenses. Not casually, not vaguely, specifically, that I had already committed funds, that I was managing the timing, that I preferred to stay quiet about it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall, letting that settle in. Because that wasn't pressure anymore. That was representation. And it wasn't just inside the family. They had extended it outward. Michael kept talking. His aunt and uncle, David's parents, had already put money down. Catering, accommodations, early deposits. Around 22,000, maybe more. They did it because they believed the rest was covered. Covered by me. I closed my eyes for a second, not out of shock, but to organize the information. This wasn't an escalation. This was a different category. I asked him one question. "Do they know I never agreed to any of this?" There was a pause on the line. "No," he said. "They think you're delaying things. Your mom told them you were being cautious with the release." That word again. Release. Like I was some kind of controlled source of funding. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it fit too cleanly with everything I had just mapped out. The system hadn't just grown, it had expanded. My family wasn't just relying on my compliance anymore. They were leveraging my reputation, my stability, my predictability. They had built a narrative around me that I hadn't even been part of. And other people had already invested in it. That was the realization that shifted everything. This wasn't about correcting a misunderstanding. This was about stopping something that was already in motion. Michael sent me screenshots while we were on the call, messages between my mother and David's parents, references to Emily's contribution, her preference for discretion, the funds being accounted for. Every line was clean, confident, assured. None of it was true. But it was believable, because it sounded like me. That was the part that hit the hardest. They didn't just use my name. They used my pattern. The way I had always handled things. Quietly, reliably, without making it public. They turned that into credibility. And once people believe a version of you, they don't question it easily. I ended the call and sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand. Not overwhelmed, not angry, just very clear. Because now I knew something I didn't know at that dinner table. This wasn't contained. This wasn't something I could ignore or let fade. There were other people involved now, people who had made decisions based on something I never said. And that changes the rules. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the empty parking lot. Everything felt quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. This one had direction. Because once other people are pulled into a situation like this, it stops being personal. It becomes something that needs to be corrected. Not loudly, not emotionally, but directly. And that's when I realized exactly what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to argue with my family. I was going to talk to the people they had already convinced. So I sat back down at the desk, opened my laptop again, and started drafting a message. Not emotional, not defensive, just clear enough that it couldn't be misunderstood. I addressed it to David and his parents. I kept the tone neutral, almost clinical. I recently became aware that my name and financial involvement have been referenced in relation to the wedding. I want to clarify that I have not committed to any financial contribution, nor authorized any use of my accounts. I read it twice, then removed anything that sounded like frustration, because this wasn't about how I felt. It was about what could be proven. I attached a few documents, the flagged account notice, the timeline I had built. screenshots that showed dates, not opinions. Enough to establish facts, not overwhelm them. Then I paused before sending. Not because I doubted it, because I knew what it would trigger. Once they read it, the version of the story my parents had built would start to break. And once it breaks for one person, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. I hit send. The reply came faster than I expected. Less than half an hour. David's father asked if we could meet the next morning. He didn't argue. He didn't defend anyone. He just said one line. If this is accurate, we need to understand everything. That was all I needed to hear. The next morning, I met them in a private room at a restaurant. Nothing dramatic. Just a table, a few chairs, and people who were trying to make sense of something that didn't add up anymore. I didn't rush. I walked them through it step by step. What I had agreed to, which was nothing. What had been said in my name, which was a lot. And what could be verified. Every document, every message, every detail lined up. I didn't add commentary. I didn't speculate. I just showed them the gap between what they were told and what was real. And once people see that gap clearly, they don't need you to convince them. They draw their own conclusions. David barely spoke. His mother watched me the entire time, not interrupting, just evaluating. His father asked a few direct questions, all practical. By the end of it, the tone had shifted completely. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was a misrepresentation. And misrepresentation has consequences. I gathered my things, stood up, and thanked them for listening. No dramatics, no closing statement. Just closure. Because I knew something had already changed in that room. They weren't going to call my parents to smooth things over. They were going to start verifying everything. And once that process starts, it doesn't stop where you want it to. I knew it before I even got back to my car. My phone started lighting up again, but this time the tone was different. Not controlled, not strategic. It felt urgent. My sister called first, then again, and again. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, she had called 10 times. I didn't answer. Then the texts started. What did you say to them? You need to fix this. They're canceling things. I read them, but I didn't respond. I just kept driving. By the time I got home, the situation had already started to unravel. Not slowly, not quietly. All at once. David's family had paused every major payment, catering, accommodations, venue coordination, anything that depended on future funds. They didn't make a scene. They just stopped. And when money stops moving, people start asking questions. My parents tried to get ahead of it. I saw the messages later. Calls, explanations, attempts to reframe everything as a misunderstanding. But the problem with that strategy is simple. It only works when people still trust you. And trust had just been disrupted. That same afternoon, my father left me a voicemail. No anger this time, no control. Just pressure leaking through his voice. Emily, call me back. This is getting out of hand. They're pulling things. People are asking questions. I listened to it once, then saved it. Because what he meant wasn't hard to hear. Things weren't getting out of hand. They were getting out of his control. By the next day, the consequences started stacking up. The venue kept part of the deposit. The florist canceled the design order. The band invoked their contract clause and charged a penalty. Every agreement that had been signed under the assumption of stable funding started collapsing, one by one, and the total kept growing. Tens of thousands, then more. Fees, deposits, non-refundable costs. Everything they had committed to, assuming I would step in at the last minute. But I didn't. That was the part they hadn't planned for. My sister showed up at my apartment that night. No warning. No call ahead. She knocked hard, fast, like urgency could force the door open. I stepped outside and closed it behind me. She looked different, not put together, not confident. Her voice was sharp at first. "Do you understand what you've done?" she said. "Everything is falling apart." I looked at her for a second. "They paused it," I said. "They didn't cause it." She froze, just enough to feel it. "Our plans are ruined," she said, quieter now. "Your plans were based on something that wasn't real," I replied. She shook her head, pacing a little. "You're making this worse. You could just fix it. You always do." That line landed exactly where it always had. Except this time, it didn't hold. "I'm not fixing this," I said, because it was never mine to fix. That was when the shift happened. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. Her posture changed. The certainty dropped. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was fear. "Please," she said, softer now. "Don't let them think I did this alone." I held her gaze for a second. "You didn't do it alone," I said. "But you still did it." She didn't argue. For the first time, she didn't try to redirect it or soften it. She just stood there, trying to process something she had never had to face before. Consequences. I stepped back toward my door, hand on the handle. "They're not canceling because of me," I said. "They're canceling because they finally have the full picture." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but nothing came out. So I went inside, closed the door, and let the silence settle. Over the next few days, everything continued to unravel. The engagement was officially ended. Not postponed, not delayed, ended. Contracts were reviewed, payments were disputed, conversations that had been avoided for months were forced into the open. My parents tried everything: calls, messages, explanations. But once people start verifying information for themselves, narratives lose power. And they had built everything on narrative. That was the part that collapsed first. The rest followed. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in the middle of it. I was watching it from the outside, seeing exactly how much of it had depended on me staying in place. A few days later, my sister asked to meet. Not a call, not a message asking me to fix something, just one line. "Can we talk?" We met at a small park near the lake. Cold air, almost empty, the kind of place people go when they don't want to be seen. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with her hands tucked into her sleeves. No makeup, no performance, no carefully controlled expression, just quiet. That alone told me everything had changed. I sat down beside her, leaving just enough space between us. Neither of us spoke right away. The silence wasn't tense. It was unfamiliar. "They're blaming me now," she said finally. I believed her, because that's how systems like ours work. When something breaks, they don't fix it. They shift the weight. I looked out at the water for a second before responding. "They're not wrong," I said, "but they're not right either." She let out a short laugh, not amused, just tired. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "I thought you'd come through." There it was. Not an apology. Not exactly. Just the assumption she had always been taught. I nodded slightly. "I know," I said. "That's how it's always worked." She looked at me then, really looked this time. Not like a sister expecting something. Like someone trying to understand something she had ignored for years. "I didn't know how bad it was for you," she said. I didn't respond immediately, because the answer was simple. "You didn't need to know," I said. "It worked in your favor." She flinched at that, just a little. Not because it was harsh, because it was accurate. We sat there for a while after that, letting everything settle. No one raised their voice. No one tried to rewrite anything. For the first time, there was no script. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Can you talk to them? She asked. Just tell them I wasn't the only one. I turned toward her slowly. That request felt familiar too. Not because of what she said, because of what it meant. Fix it. Smooth it over. Carry it again. I shook my head. I'm not going back into that, I said. Not to protect them. Not to protect you. She nodded, like she already knew the answer. I thought you'd always be there, she said quietly. I let that sit for a second. Yeah, I said. So did I. And that was the moment everything became clear in a way it never had before. Not what they did, not even what she did, but what I had been to all of them. And once you see that clearly, you don't step back into it the same way again. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands together, not tense, just steady. She was still looking at me, waiting, like there was one version of this conversation where I would soften. There wasn't. I'm not trying to ruin you, I said, calm, direct. I'm refusing to keep ruining myself. She didn't respond right away. That sentence didn't invite an argument. It didn't leave room for negotiation. It just sat there. For years, every situation between us had an opening, a way to adjust, to compromise, to step in and absorb whatever needed fixing. This time, there wasn't one. She nodded slowly, like she understood something she hadn't fully processed before. Not agreement, just recognition. I didn't think of it like that, she said. I know, I replied. You didn't have to. That wasn't blame. It was structure. Because when a system is built a certain way, the people benefiting from it don't question it. They move inside it. They rely on it. Until it stops working. I stood up after that, brushing my hands together lightly, more out of habit than anything else. The conversation felt complete, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing needed to be added. She didn't try to stop me, didn't ask again. She just sat there, staring out at the water, like she was seeing something different now. And as I walked away, I realized something that stayed with me. Setting a boundary doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels final. And once you cross that line, there's no going back to who you were before it. A few days later, my father sent a message asking if I would join a family call. Not a casual check-in. Not an attempt to talk things through privately. A call with relatives. The same group who had been at that table. The same people who watched everything unfold and said nothing. I almost declined, but something about it felt necessary. So I joined. There were about 20 faces on the screen. Small boxes, muted microphones, people waiting. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother looked controlled, but not calm. That was new. He started speaking first. No long introduction, no attempt to ease into it. He said I had never agreed to pay for the wedding. Simple, direct. For a second, I thought I misheard him. Then he repeated it. Slower this time. Clear enough that no one could misunderstand. My mother followed. She admitted they had involved other people based on assumptions, that they had spoken on my behalf without confirmation. She didn't look at the camera when she said it, but she said it. That mattered. There was no emotion in the room. No reactions, no interruptions. Just silence, the kind that comes when people are recalibrating what they thought they knew. No one defended them. No one challenged me, because there was nothing left to argue. The version of the story they had built was gone, and without that version, everything else had to adjust. The call ended quickly. 8 minutes, maybe less. No closure, no resolution, just acknowledgement. And as the screen went dark, I realized something. Accountability doesn't always look like remorse. Sometimes it just looks like people finally having no other version left to tell. And without that version, everything else had to adjust. The aftermath didn't happen all at once. It unfolded in layers, quiet at first, then harder to ignore. I started hearing things indirectly, messages from relatives, small updates that carried more weight than they seemed. My parents had to start paying things back, not because they wanted to, but because they had no one left to absorb it. The groom's family pushed for reimbursement. Vendors enforced their contracts. Deposits were lost, penalties stacked. Every decision they made, assuming I would step in, now had to be covered by them. I didn't step in. That was the difference. I heard my father sold his car, the one he had kept for years, the one he never let anyone else drive. My mother canceled a renovation she had been planning for months. Things that once felt untouchable suddenly became negotiable, because reality doesn't wait. It adjusts. Socially, it shifted too. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations got shorter. People who used to show up easily started keeping their distance. Not dramatically, just consistently. Trust doesn't disappear loudly. It fades in how people choose to engage. A few relatives reached out to me privately. Some apologized. Some explained why they stayed quiet. A couple admitted they had suspected something but didn't want to get involved. I listened, but I didn't absorb it. Because understanding why something happened doesn't mean stepping back into it. That was a line I had already crossed. My mother came by once, alone. No pressure this time, no expectations, just standing outside my door, looking like she didn't have a script prepared. "We handled it wrong," she said. I noticed the wording. Not, "we were wrong." Handled it wrong. Even now, it was about execution. I nodded once. "That's why it collapsed," I said. She didn't argue, didn't try to reshape it. She just stood there for a second, like she was waiting for something else. I didn't give it, because there wasn't anything left to give in that moment. After she left, I sat down and thought about how everything had changed. Not overnight, not because of one decision, but because one part of the system stopped working. And once that happens, everything built on it starts to shift, whether people are ready for it or not. A few weeks later, I signed a lease in a different city. Nothing dramatic about it. No big announcement, no emotional send-off. Just a decision made quietly, the same way everything else had been handled. I packed my things over a couple of days, kept only what I actually used, left behind anything that felt tied to who I had been in that house. It wasn't about distance from them. It was about distance from the role. The new place was simple. Bright windows, clean space, nothing inherited. The kind of place where everything inside it exists because you chose it. That mattered more than I expected. Work stayed steady. If anything, it felt easier. No interruptions, no side conversations, no quiet obligations pulling at my attention. I showed up, did what I needed to do, and left without carrying anything extra. That was new. The first real test came on Thanksgiving, not because of the holiday itself, but because of what it used to represent. Obligation, performance, a table where everything looked fine on the surface. This time, it was just a few people, friends. No tension, no unspoken expectations. No one watching to see what I would do. We ate, talked, laughed, simple things. And halfway through the night, I realized something. No one was keeping score. No one was waiting for me to step in, to fix something, to cover anything that went wrong. I was just there. That feeling stayed with me longer than anything else. Not relief. Not even happiness in the way people usually describe it. Just stability. For years, I thought strength meant being able to handle more, carry more, fix more without breaking. But that wasn't strength. That was availability. And once I stopped offering that, everything in my life started to reorganize around something else. Choice. what I gave my time to, what I allowed into my space, what I took responsibility for. It all became intentional, and the more intentional it became, the quieter everything felt. Not empty, clear. That was the difference. Because once you step out of a system that depends on you, you finally get to see what your life looks like without it. I used to think the hardest part would be letting go of them, the history, the idea of family I had been holding on to for years. But that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was accepting something simpler. That being needed is not the same as being valued. And once you see that clearly, you start making different choices. You stop explaining yourself. You stop negotiating your own limits just to keep things comfortable for other people. You just decide what belongs to you, what doesn't. And the moment you say no to what was never yours, everything shifts. Not all at once, but enough that you never mistake obligation for love again. I carried a lot for a long time without questioning it. It felt like responsibility, like the right thing to do. But looking back now, I see the difference clearly. Being reliable made me available, not respected. And that changes how you move through life. You don't need to prove your value by how much you carry. You prove it by what you choose to carry. When something isn't yours, it's okay to step back, even if people don't understand it. Because the truth is simple. If your absence breaks something, it was never yours to fix in the first place.